Okay, hi everybody. David Fogel back with you, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation. Back with another Symphonina Foundation podcast. We took a week off. My wife and I went to Hawaii for a week. It was wonderful. It's nice to be home, but it was wonderful, I have to say. But now we're back in the swing of things and we're ramping up for the Grammy season. And I have with me my friend, Conductor John Jeter from the Fort Smith Symphony. John, it's your second time on the show, which makes you officially a friend of the show. So congratulations. Congratulations to you, and thank you for coming back. You have two albums that you're submitting for Grammy consideration this year from Florence Price's work. So let me start by asking, how did you select her? I think I know, but let's see if my intuition is correct. And tell us a little bit about the albums and what you got going on.
So starting back in 2018, I guess, maybe a little bit before that, the intent was for Naxos Records and I to start recording her music. At that time, she wasn't terribly well known. They just think about just last 5-6 years, the amazing difference. So these two recordings, I guess you could say, are kind of the final two in the recorded cycle of all of her Florence Price's music for orchestra, and that includes orchestra. So, I started out recording her symphonies and then sort of her large-scale tone poems. And now we're at her, there's a concerto album, and then there is a choral works album. So it's the concerto album and the choral album this time around. The concertos actually in best classical instrumental solo. That's what, hope I can mention that. That's what category we're
That's
looking
fine.
at. Yeah. And Grammy rules are such that we can only enter one soloist. So the recording is, the concertos recording actually has both of the violin concertos, but also the piano concerto.
Mm-hmm.
And the piano concerto with Han Chen as the piano soloist, that's what's actually being entered.
Very good. Okay.
So, and it's the first, which we don't think in terms of actual physical product much anymore. But this is the first project where there's physically all of her three concertos on one album, if you will. Anyway, Han Chen, again, focusing just on the piano concerto. Great piece, and it's a piano concerto in one movement from 1933-34. Han Chen was a terrific soloist. He was great to work with in the studio. The orchestra is the Malmo Opera Orchestra, and they're based in Malmo, Sweden. So we took a day. I think we recorded it in a day. He's a fabulous soloist. Great. And I'm actually bringing him in as soloist with Fort Smith Symphony a year from now, a year from our recording of this interview.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one release. And then the other release, Best Choral Performance, are a selection of Florence Price's choral works, including two world premieres. Abraham Lincoln Walks at Midnight, which is her cantata or mini oratorio, if you will. This is for chorus, soloists, and orchestra. It's a world premiere recording. I think it's the second time the piece has been performed. Also, world premiere recording of Song of Hope, which is a shorter work for full orchestra, soloists, and chorus. And then after that are about 10 shorter works for chorus and piano. There's a piece with chorus and organ, and then there's an a cappella piece. So it's a terrific overview, I think, of her music. But the focus of the recording, this choral album, is Abraham Lincoln Walks at Midnight. It's kind of a major American choral masterpiece that hopefully will start to be performed. It's totally deserving of that.
I read that Price was very prolific, really, maybe over 300 total works, something like that. But it's great. You've done all of her symphonic work now, right? So 4 symphonies.
So yeah, well, there's 4 numbered symphonies, but symphony number 2 really doesn't exist, or it's gone. We can't find it. There's some manuscript scores for part of the first movement. So there's the 3 symphonies.
Okay.
There's a number of like symphonic poems and some overtures and some dance music. Yeah. And then the 3 concertos, and there's lots of choral works, actually. She wrote a lot for church choirs, and this is only really a small selection. These are the legal ones. What I mean by that is we recorded music that is available through the G. Schirmer music, And G. Schirmer owns the rights to the Price archive.
Oh, okay.
So, we've been working with them, and these are all pieces that are rentable from them for performance. And it was a great project. These two recordings were recorded one week after another in Malmo, Sweden.
So when you're doing the recordings, and you're maybe a couple of like procedural questions. So you're ready to go with the recording. You've got the piece. Everybody studied it. They know what they need to do. All the players are there. The recording engineers there. Producers are there, and all that. And you get started. Is there anything that you are listening for or looking for as a conductor when you're doing a recording that is different than what you would do if you were doing a performance for a live audience?
Well, first of all, to answer that question in a general sense, making a recording and performing are two totally different things, as we know. I don't think people realize this. Our enthusiastic listeners realize, like, how can it be that different? It is a totally different aesthetic. So there's that aspect of it. What I'm listening for is, in the case, deciding on style. With Price's music, both the producer engineer and I are also on the lookout for any errors. And I'm happy to say we covered that very well in these recordings. A challenge with all of Price's music and all of her recordings has always been that although she was a clean copyist, there are mistakes. And in some cases, there's quite a few. And even in the published works that are available for rent, you have to be really careful. Her style of writing, her harmonies, she likes real thick harmonies. It's from all the years of writing for the organ and playing for the organ. So she likes these thick chords. And one of the challenges is sometimes if there's a note that needs to be fixed, you have a couple of choices. It's not like a Beethoven symphony where, it has to be a B flat. This could be a couple of choices. And studying the music, in this case, spending a lot of time at the piano playing through things, you're studying. And then when you hear the orchestra play it, sometimes voicings, certain chords, they're going to sound different. They're going to work differently when an orchestra is playing it versus a piano. So there's this constant battle you're sort of looking at. And someone might think, well, no, if it's a wrong note and it's clear in the piano and in the orchestra part, actually not really, not with her harmonies, and with a lot of composers. So there's kind of this X-ray hearing going on, if you will, of what's going on. But of course, that's behind just the most important part, which is making music with the piece, right? Yeah. And making decisions on style. The Malmo Opera Orchestra is great they're an opera orchestra, so they're very versatile. They do opera, music theater, all sorts of different things. So they're very quick to establish a playing style or if there's something that needs to be changed. So that was really an excellent opportunity. And I don't think I mentioned it, but the choral album, it's the Malmo Opera Chorus. And they are a full-time professional opera chorus. Same thing. You ask them to make a change, they're used to it. It's a great, it was all Elena Mitrevska. I hope I'm saying her last name right. She was the chorus master. A lot of work, of course, was done in advance. And I'm very proud of how it turned out. I think one of the things that people will notice is the pronunciation is quite good. This is a Swedish chorus, and it was fun working with them on American English.
Yeah.
There's a lot of choir. I said I don't want this to sound like the King's College Choir, where usually English text, it ends up sounding sort of British, actually, in a lot of words. Like, no, this needs to be. We need the long A's, and we need some street talk pronunciation. And it was fun to do that. And there was a member of the chorus who was American, so he was really helpful in advance. And they would do an outstanding job, and there would be sometimes some really beautiful diction. It's like, no, don't do that. It needs to be this.
Too perfect. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting then when you're working with something that's not as you said, so obvious or so clear, that the players, not just you, but the players need to be able to be flexible and take direction from you and try things and be willing to do it and be able to do it.
Yeah, and I think for me anyway, doing this sort of repertoire, the idea is, although the approach is often very different than live performance, for me anyway, I do want it to have that live performance feel to it and sound to it. And without going into a lot of details, just sometimes I've had a lot of situations where I'll play something in concert. With my Fort Smith recordings, we usually do a concert beforehand, and it's so funny how we'll rehearse something for a certain style, and then when we get into the studio, as it were, in order to keep that style, we might have to play it totally differently because we're playing for microphones as
Yeah.
opposed to having to project out into a hall.
Yeah.
So, if you want some real lush, sustained legato passage and you want it to project out into the hall, you're going to play maybe notes very long and, a certain style. But in a session, sometimes, and depending on the space for us, sometimes if you want the notes long, you play them short and then the producer adds the reverb.
Okay.
See? Whereas if it's long, the producer, if you're just playing it long, the producer doesn't have much control over the reverb, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it depends. I mean, that's just one example of a specific thing. It also, depends on the space in the particular passage. But the point being that, again, live performance, preparing for live performance or versus studio, very, very different.
Yeah. Are you the lead producer on the album, or did you work with a team of other people? Tell me about that process.
Both of these albums are on Naxos Records, and they're their albums. I had the producer, engineer, and editor all in one for both albums. It was Sean Lewis, British. He lives in Norway. He's a horn player. Absolutely fantastic, man. Just incredible. Great to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And the unsung heroes of all recordings, right? They always think about the artists, and then they get kind of mentioned somewhere. But in the recording world, really, the producer, he or she, they're really in charge, and I enjoy working with that. And for people might be listening and saying, well, then that's not really true. When Herbert von Karajan and Bernstein and Schulte made that, no, those producers would say, Maestro, they would decide things actually. Because as you know, you're in the session, you're in front of the orchestra, and that is a totally different aural experience than the engineer who's in the other room or down the hall. And he or she's experiencing the music, maybe with score there, with speakers. And they're experiencing it the way the purchaser of the recording is going to experience it in their living room, right? So again, the aesthetic is just, it's amazing how different it is.
Yeah. And then, of course, what you want to, as a producer, what you want to spotlight may be different than what you're hearing at that particular time, or you just may want to try different things and say, let's have 3 different takes of a particular section, let's say, and then see which ones work out best.
Exactly. And if a composer has a ritardando, when you're experiencing it live, it can be different when you're like looking at the orchestra, listening to it, as opposed to when you're in the other room. So sometimes if there's a change in tempo, depending on the producer, depending on the music, you might have to do more for the recording or less. That's where the producer comes in. And the conductor or whoever it is, soloist, might have this very specific idea of how he or she wants a passage or phrase to go. But from the producer's standpoint, who's ultimately going to be sort of representing the general public listener, it's like, no, it needs to be done this way. And I've seen situations where many producers will say, can you do this faster, slower, take more time here? And that's their job. And I, as a conductor, actually, I love it because it's nice someone has my back.
Yeah. Right.
And I enjoy it. And if someone has a very different, we've had many situations where, I think it should be this way. And it's great to work together on the product. You were right there, or I totally understand why you want to do that. Let's try it this way. That's part of the fun.
I think probably there's something to the McGurk effect also, where when you're watching something and listening to it, sometimes you can hear it differently than if you just close your eyes and listen to it. So if the producer is imagining it with their eyes closed, where you're conducting, you better not have your eyes closed. It can be or someone in the audience, let's just say, of a live performance, it can be a different experience.
Exactly. And then I know in the classical music world, which this I don't agree with, but also, and these are, straight, I guess you could say, not traditional repertoire, but, standard, Naxos Records, classical recordings. There's also sort of a question of, well, you get this a lot with multiple recordings. Like, if it's a Brahms symphony, how much do you try? How far can you go outside of the norm or something like that? And
Mhm.
sometimes you think about things like repeated listenings. Maybe you don't want to do something that's a little too. I like a lot of the difference and variations, actually. But, there's an aesthetic for a lot of producers or record companies that say what needs to kind of stay within these norms. Whereas maybe if you're doing it live, you could go a little crazier. Who
That's,
knows?
yeah, it sounds good, John. What are you working on now for what we should anticipate coming soon?
So, well, live concerts. So
Nice.
talking about
Okay.
difference, yeah. So at the time of this interview, we're getting ready to start our season in Fort Smith. So we have a very cool season lined up. And then for recordings, I'm gonna probably take a little bit of a breather, which is totally fine because it's a crazy thing. And then in 27, we're going to be, I don't want to say too much, but we're going to be recording our first project of with living composers.
Okay.
And I'll just say it'll be two symphonies and a fantastic double concerto that'll be on this release. And we're really excited. We just proved it a few days ago. So that'll be the next project, unless something that's the one thing that's penciled in. There are a couple things that could happen sooner, but I don't know yet.
Is that typical for you to be planning 2 years into the future?
Oh yeah. So at the time of our interview, we just our next season. Well, at the time of our interview, our season's starting in a couple days, but the one next year, yeah, it starts like a year from now. Yeah, we just approved all that a couple days ago with our board of directors.
Yeah.
So yeah, we always plan to get excellent guest artists, and for recording projects, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah. It's amazing to me how long in advance everything has to be planned, but
yeah,
it does seem to be the way of the world.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's all going great, and I appreciate working with Naxos, and I think the recordings have all done really well, and excited to see what happened. At least getting the word out as we do now, right?
Yeah.
About recordings. I hope people will listen to them and enjoy them. And Price is, relatively, recently rediscovered, and of course now everyone knows who she is. But there's still so much of her music that we're not familiar with yet.
Yes. And a native, how do you say it? Arkansan or Arkansan?
Arkansas, yes,
Arkansan, a native
Arkansas.
Arkansan too.
That's
John, it's
right.
been great catching up with you. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Through the Fort Smith Symphony, I think. I think it's info fortsmithsymphony.org. I mean, I've got Facebook and Instagram. They can do that. Absolutely.
Okay. And you're always open for people to reach out to you, right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, just like I have.
Yeah.
So then maybe
Absolutely.
we'll see you at some of the Grammy events or the pre-Grammy events that are probably coming up this month. I hope to.
Yeah, a couple. Unfortunately, some of the ones are planned right during rehearsals, so I can't do
Yeah,
it.
gotcha.
And also, I don't have it in front of me, but your project for this year is fabulous, as it
Oh,
always is.
well,
And
thank you, sir. Yeah, that's Ascension Symphonina Rising for you at home.
I love, as we've talked about before, and kind of related to this project, this idea of presenting new music, whether it's rediscovered or just new pieces.
Hmm.
I really, and I managed to get this in on every interview, and I do a lot of interviews. The importance of that there's so much music out there. There's so much music that written by exciting composers, as well as so much music that's just sitting there not being performed. And in the classical world, there's this tendency to focus on about the same 15 composers, and
Right.
there's so much music out there. There's so much. It's like, yeah, I probably have 15 favorite movies, but I don't want to keep. There's only so many times you can see it.
Yeah, it's
So
true. True. Well, I appreciate that greatly. Thank you. And I totally agree with you, of course. So
yeah,
we keep trying to do our part to spread the joy of symphonic music to young audiences around the world and older audiences too. So appreciate that. John, we're going to listen to some more of your great work on the way out here. And I encourage everybody to listen to Florence Price's work with John conducting both the choral work and the instrumental solo work for violin and piano. And John, we'll look forward to having you back as a three-time friend of the show in the future.
well, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you.